Let's get started. All right, settle down. Here to talk about Google Analytics 4. I feel a little bit like this morning we had the Know Your Numbers talk, and Ben said that everybody who comes here is like kind of sick of the topic, but we all need to at some point change, and Google Analytics 4 is a big opportunity. At the same time, it's a big change that is coming up, and there is John. Maybe you come to the front in order to, in the next slide, we'll introduce ourselves. So, all right, Google Analytics 4 is the topic of today. I'm going to go through this a little bit for entrepreneurs. I guess you all guys have websites, and Google Analytics 4 is a big change that is coming up. Presenting to you, I will go through the presentation pretty quickly on my end, and I also got John here who works with a lot of clients, and we'll be able to answer any kind of questions if you have also questions about alternatives to Google Analytics 4. All right. Cool. For those of you who didn't look at all the announcements and the annoying pop-ups and the hype around Google Analytics 4, all that Google makes it out to be. Although I'm not from Google, I train a lot of people on Google Analytics, so it's my vested interest to help people out with Google Analytics, but I'm not married to the tool, and at some point there will be another tool that will dominate the market. Right now it's Google Analytics, and maybe we'll see with this change what Google has in store for us and if this is the right thing. So what happened so far? Universal Analytics is shutting down. What does this mean for you? Well, first of all, why is it shutting down? Well, Google has an old technology running. They want to really make this thing work, app plus web. So you have the apps that came out. They always had separate products for this, and with the new data model, with the new capabilities, the new tech that is behind this new platform, they are able to track both of these things. The second part is privacy. Privacy has been a big topic in the analytics world for quite some time now, the past few years really, because of new regulations that came into place. At the same time, we have iOS and these browser protections that came along. iOS is one of the big tech players, platforms now saying, hey, we are the privacy company, although Apple is also gearing up to build their own advertising platform. And we have cookie protections, which obviously, or consent protections nowadays. In Europe, definitely, GDPR is a big topic. So there's a lot of things coming together. That's why Google Analytics 4 has been conceptualized. And Google also wants to make profit on their return on investment on their machine learning. So they're one of the big players in AI, obviously. And nowadays, we can't really know with the privacy and browser protections in place where our conversions are coming from. And oftentimes we don't know, and Google wants to make sure that they give us the best in the world of analytics. And with this new technology, they can actually do so. Quick FAQ. Will my data be deleted if you have Google Analytics running right now? Yes, the answer is yes. Next year in July, they will stop tracking data into your account. So if you have Google Analytics, Universal Analytics running, then this data will still be in there, but no new data will be tracked. And then they said they will shut down the interface a few months later, probably at the end of the year, which means you don't have access to the data because there's no way to easily just export your data. There are a few APIs available, but no comprehensive way to take all of your data that you have gathered maybe over the last 10 years and transport it over to another tool. Can I just upgrade? No, you can't just upgrade because Google Analytics 4 is a completely new tool that is really a revolution to this kind of the Google Analytics toolset, and you need new implementation, you need new training for the staff because it's completely different interface. You need to get used to new data as well. So you can't just say, I relied on this report, and in Google Analytics 4 then it needs to be something similar. You will need to get used to reading the new reports as well. Is my GA4 data comparable to UA? No, because the technology that is used, you can track data in many different ways, and Google Analytics 4 is doing this in many different ways differently than UA, and therefore you need to get used to this new data. It's not all bad. Universal Analytics was universal analytics is quite, was never 100% accurate, and therefore this new data will not be 100% accurate. You just need to get used to this new data. But if you're trying to compare and start this game of comparison, it's always you will be really unhappy because you're looking, oh, my page views were here and now they're there. But all of the tools are very, very different. All right, should I still be using Google Analytics? That's a very interesting question. I think there's a lot of people thinking about, like, why don't I now switch away? Because there's a big opportunity for Google to do the right thing, but it did a lot of things wrong as well, and therefore we might be talking a little bit about switching as well today. And maybe John can give some insights later on. All right, what is Google Analytics 4? And now I'm going to go through the good parts of Google Analytics 4, and maybe you'll find some interest in the tool. So first of all, it's not an upgrade, it's a new tool. You need to know this new tool. It has its capabilities, and the first big change here is that there's a new data model. New data model means that previously you were tracking page views, transactions, interaction hits. There were many different things that you could implement into the tool. Nowadays, it's just an event and the parameters. And a lot of developers will be familiar with this concept. You can take any kind of parameter for your business model. So if you have a subscription model, you can say new subscription and what is the level of the subscription and so on. Previously in Google Analytics, it was many times was more reference towards e-commerce or maybe more the publishing model. But now you can feasibly take any kind of business model or what the website is about and form it into Google Analytics and work with that data inside of the system. You have automatic tracking. So previously, you put the Google Analytics code on there, and you needed to do a lot of customization in order to get events handled and so on. Nowadays, you can do video views automatically. You just need to click a button, and it does it automatically. There's some problems with that, as it's based on a standard case, so a YouTube video that you have implemented. You still sometimes need to have a little bit of customization if you want to become more sophisticated. But if you are somebody who's just starting out with Google Analytics, it got much easier on that front. There's a new reporting and new UI. So the most interesting part here, I think, is, for example, funnel analytics has become much easier because you can take any kind of event, put them into a funnel, into your steps, and then you can see certain new data around how long did it take a user to go from one funnel step to the next funnel step, how many people dropped off, and so on. So that has become much easier, and you have a few more reports that Google gives you nowadays. You can obviously customize it even further to your liking. The big thing for anybody who's really deep into analytics, for people who are in bigger organizations, is the BigQuery export. This was a paid feature in Universal Analytics, so you had to upgrade to UA 360 in order to get access to this, and this is the export to BigQuery. So you can take all your raw data and now export it to a data warehouse from Google. It's still from Google, but it's on your own GCP, Google Cloud Platform. So practically you are taking ownership of that data, and that is a big part of why Google is also making this available. So you have now the ability to take ownership of your data and actually take that data and export it to somewhere else, right? You can export it to another warehouse system and so on. It's sometimes also some people say it's a hidden money-making or business model for Google, because BigQuery actually costs money. It's very cost-effective for smaller to mid-sized sites, but big sites obviously can get quite expensive quite fast. But BigQuery is a system that, you can do raw data analysis, but you need to know a little bit of SQL in order to write these queries. But a lot of data analysts are very excited about this feature. If you know SQL and want to do deep data analysis, you can take your data, also combine it with data from your CRM or whatever other systems you have, and really put it all together so it makes sense for you. And this is not within Google Analytics, it's outside of Google Analytics, it's in BigQuery. Machine learning, I already touched on this a little bit, but inside of the system you have audiences now available that are not normally available to people that would build their analytics themselves. So for example, people who would churn in the next 28 days or people who are likely to buy. You can build these audiences because Google has learned from your data and actually send them to Google AdWords to retarget these people and so on. So this is quite interesting, but you need to have the eligibility. So my site is here not yet big enough in order to actually have enough data for Google to learn from that data. The other thing, you can be happy about this, but it's coming to analytics. Analytics is not getting easier because of model data. So one thing that we are experiencing is that we have less and less data available because of these tracking preventions, ad blockers, and so on. And therefore, we have holes in our analytics, especially when it comes to attribution. And Google wants to fill these gaps with their model data. So they can say they have data available even outside of Google Analytics. So if you don't have that tracking installed, there is data from when people go to Google, for example. You are maybe logged in on your device as well. So they have this data available. They cannot make it available to you as raw data because that would be a privacy concerns. But they have that data in the background. So they want to now fill these gaps with model data. And there it comes to, they could say, oh, this is AdWords, for example, on this first box. And AdWords was the one that brought the conversion, right? The question is, do you trust this model? Do you trust their machine learning? In the end, it comes down to which model do you trust most, especially when it comes to tools. Everybody says, oh, we do this AI machine learning kind of thing, but do you trust their algorithm in the end? And you can't really tell because they will not give you the recipe that they have.
Yeah, because Facebook does that already anyway.
Yeah.
So if you do Facebook ads, you're already getting model data, so it's
Yeah.
just a debate on who's modeling it.
Yeah. Who is modeling your data? Yeah. Who is modeling your data? And what incentive do they have? Obviously, Google has an incentive for Google Ads as well. That was actually a slide. All right, quick implementation tips on this part. Double tag right now, so keep your UA running, but put Google Analytics 4 on it. Because of the shutdown in July, you already missed the first deadline. If you want to do a year-on-year analysis, so you want to see what was my data 1 year ago, you will not be able to do that if you are starting to track right now, but it's better to start to track in the new GA4 right now in order to be able to go back as far as possible. The second part is Google doesn't want to retain your data. So they have actually a setting where they only retain your raw data for 2 months and then they throw it away. You will still have access to the reporting, so to see how many page views you had and so on for a long time. I think there's no limit on this just yet. But for some reporting, so if you want to go deep into your data and do segmentation after segmentation, then at some point Google will tell you, well, we don't have that data available anymore. And so they have a setting where you can, 2 months is the default, but you should set it to 14 months. Actually, in the paid version, you can go even higher. Or you obviously put in BigQuery export, which we have in a second there. Don't use Google Signals just yet. It screws up with your data. Google Signals is a feature to connect, to get data that Google has available in the background, like demographic data and so on, that they get from Google Ads. But if you turn this on and change the reporting identity, it messes a lot with the data. So just leave that off and do device-based tracking. And then the second part, set up your conversions. That's obviously the thing that you should always do also with Universal Analytics if you don't have goals installed. This is the new goals. Set up your conversions and then connect BigQuery. It's very cost effective. And if you ever see yourself or your business running into having a data analyst at some point who can write SQL queries, then just turn it on because you will not pay much. I have never paid for BigQuery with our site, so it's because you have a free tier, and if you don't use it much, it's actually usage based. The saving of the data costs a little bit of money, but then also the usage costs a little bit of money. So that is something you should turn on if you have the time. All right, let's talk about the bad and then about the ugly. GA4 is still developing, and I think this change has come very rapidly for many things, for many people, and then they really pushed it because they now need to switch over to have that better data available for privacy reasons and so on. So first of all, there's still some inconsistencies. Even inside of the interface, if you look at data from one day to the next, the data might be different. If you look at reporting that shows you conversions here and conversions there, they should be the same. They're sometimes not. So you need to kind of live with that at the moment, and they say, yeah, it will get better at some point. But we hope that Google gets rid of these inconsistencies, because as somebody who's working with the data, you obviously want to just be sure that you're checking it once or twice, and then you want to be sure that it actually makes sense to you. You need to start trusting the machine, and that's why inconsistencies are unfortunately still there. The deadline is there. I don't know why they put themselves on this artificial deadline, and they are pushing, we are pushing, and just stay calm in the end. We just implement Google Analytics 4 and hope it will work out. The thing is that the deadline is just something that a lot of people are freaking out about, and it has been quite a bit of stir in the analytics community, and yeah, we will talk about some alternative. And then there's a legal risk involved, especially for European companies, because in Europe, a lot of these privacy agencies have declared Google Analytics illegal. So on the one hand, this mainly contains Universal Analytics, because Universal has still these little quirks that made it illegal under GDPR. But currently, the argument that they use is that the data that is transferred to US servers, so once you send data over to the US, that would be illegal from a privacy standpoint already. And since Google Analytics uses the user IP address and so on to do geolocation, Google has acknowledged this, obviously, but it's a big problem. Theoretically, all of the US services would be illegal if we would just exercise this through every little tool that is out there. Now, what you need to understand is Biden just signed something, hopefully it will go through, but there's legal risk involved for everybody around. Google Analytics is obviously a very big target, especially for privacy advocacy groups. They could sue any kind of tool out there, like Cloudflare even, but they choose Google Analytics because it's obviously Google, and there's this tool out there. So you have these legal risks around it. Yes, go ahead, John.
I'll just quickly say, so the issues at the moment are at Universal Analytics, but that's not to say that GA4, that everything's fine with GA4.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that GA4 hasn't as yet been considered and hasn't the process to go through reviewing whether or not GA4 is GDPR compliant, hasn't been the focus up until now.
Right, yeah. So Universal is still out there, so it's the target, but once it goes away, we need another 2 or 3 years until somebody goes through with the lawsuit and then gets to that point. All right, let's get to the ugly parts right now. And this is really about, should you as an entrepreneur think about switching? Google Analytics 4 is really great because it's free, and that's why everybody started out with it. It has a huge community around it, and that is to say, if you Google for anything, you'll find people. I base my business around this on the tool that is free, and a lot of people want to know about it. It's very, very powerful if you use it correctly, and the feature set you don't get in any kind of paid tool that is comparable. If you want it for free, if you wanted to spend a couple of grand, then yes, you could probably get feature comparison. But yeah, and in the end, there's a huge community around it. Comparability-wise, the interesting part is if you ask any kind of VC, if you want to sell your business at some point, well, where's your Google Analytics? They only trust this data because they have a comparable set of data, right? So maybe it's wise to keep Google Analytics running, although you don't use it too much, because you want to sell your business later on, and you need to have the metrics there. Because if you have an obscure tool and you say, oh, I have this many page views, yeah, what does this mean? Because page views can be calculated in many different ways. All right, connections. If you use Google Ads, I mean, there's no other tool that you will get that data from and can correlate it to your web data that is. Google Analytics is mainly for your website, then Google Ads data can feed into that. And there's no other tool out there that can do this because Google has built this basically for Google Ads, for their Google Ads customers in the days. And yeah, the the capabilities are there quite big. And you have also other tools like Merchant Center can now integrate BigQuery and so on. So there will be more and more capabilities. Google has changed around a little bit the scope of Google Analytics. So it's not only this one size fits all analytics suite anymore. They have now Data Studio, which is now renamed into Looker Studio, which helps you to visualize your data. So that's comparable to Tableau. They also have Google Tag Manager, which helps you set up tags on your website, these marketing codes on your website. So it integrates all quite well with Google Analytics. And if you don't want to go away from that, then you're kind of stuck with Google Analytics. And yeah, go ahead.
What's the shortcut for someone who's just running a small business? Like, I don't need the myriad of data that Google supplies. In fact, it complexifies it for me. I maybe need to measure 3 or 4 points.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just want to set it up quickly. And
switch over to another tool. Then you need to.
What do you recommend?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately I'm not invested into this. I love Google Analytics and I want more people to know about it. But especially for people in Europe, I think the legal troubles are quite big. And the setup of a consent management tool is not trivial. You need to spend already money on the consent management tool in order to get it set up. So having a small tool that is maybe GDPR safe because it has it on a label and so on. So they have built it based on that. And you just are tracking your page views and so on. Yeah, we'll talk about some alternatives in a second. All right, and machine learning. I mean, Google has this machine learning algorithm, and they are adding more and more. The Google Ads people know about this. We are the first industry, or online marketing is the first industry that will probably be like heavily automated. And they're testing all of this stuff on our data, and they will introduce that into the tool. So you cannot replace this by just building your own analytics tool or a small tool. Getting that set up because Google has the capabilities and they will bring it out first in there too. All right, just on the bad side, you have the legal risks. I think the learning curve might be higher on other tools. So if you switch, you need to learn a new tool because you might not find everything that they might name stuff differently. The thing how they come up with the metrics might be different. So there's a learning curve oftentimes involved, even if you go on to Google Analytics 4, which is kind of also a risk there. There is integration cost. So if you integrate Google Analytics 4 on your end, it kind of makes it, Google Analytics 4 needs to be re-implemented on your page completely. And then the question is always, do you trust Google Analytics 4? Because in a few years, it will come down to trust. We will probably not have the data anymore to say, oh, so many people came from AdWords and Facebook and so on. It will all be a guessing game. All of the tools will give you different data. And you need to find a tool that you trust most because you have gotten used to the data itself. And that's where we come to the Google Analytics alternatives. There are a lot of alternatives out there. I can't speak to all of them. The thing that I would say about alternatives is there's not one out there that I can recommend for every business out there. Obviously, a lot of these, even a Google Analytics, needs to be implemented correctly and it needs to be customized to the business needs. The second part is that once you start looking for an alternative, you're going into a rabbit hole where you need to ask yourself some questions. Why am I using analytics? What is the data that I'm getting right now? Can I model the data that I need, the reports that I need onto this tool? Can I make somebody use this tool? So if the email marketing team is using Google Analytics, how are you going to make that email marketing team work with this new solution? So it's always a risk, obviously, when you switch over to another tool. We can look at different tools. There are also different levels of tools, right? So if you are a small business and you just want to switch over, maybe a Phantom or Plausible are alternatives right now that are popping up everywhere. A Matomo is a self-hosted solution that you can utilize. It's open source and gains a lot of traction right now, especially in the GDPR world in Europe. But then you go into more corporate levels where you say, okay, I need a solution like a Pivot Pro that helps me out, or Adobe Experience Cloud is out there. Mixpanel maybe more geared towards mixed panel or amplitude more geared towards like SaaS businesses. So you might have differences in business models out there. And then there is also a trend, and a lot of startups use this, but also I think bigger companies now recognize that data is an advantage, a competitive advantage, and you need to take ownership of your data and actually start building your own algorithms around it. So they hire data scientists and so on. I mean, this is really high level stuff, and that's where you want to start building your own data warehouse, to build your own analytics stack out from the measurement part to actually visualizing that data. And nowadays there are these components out there that you can actually use. So you can go and, for example, take Snowplow. It's very down here, Snowplow, and this gives you a protocol on how to build your data stack and put it into your Amazon AWS and have your data there, and then you can use the databases, but also different ways to connect it then to your algorithms, or visualize your data then in Tableau and so on, and work with your data, wrangle it, clean it up, connect it to other data sources. So you can be really, really creative with this one, but I think it takes a data engineering team to actually make that work.